Hey guys, it's your boy Brainsy. Welcome to day 93 of Workout Ride. It's currently Friday and it's 12:24 p.m. It's a bit of an afternoon, but I swear I am not wasting my time, bruh. I'm actually working. I mean, not really working, but like I'm doing something that I believe will be beneficial for me in the long run. I have cleaned through my MacBook files. Um, Previously, the past couple of days, it's been really low on storage. It's like 15 gigs of storage left, and it was kind of concerning because I didn't really put a lot of files in my MacBook. Then I realized there's some, residual files that are left from the deleted applications that I've had, especially with Genshin Impact. Bro, that thing is 40 gigs, bruh. Just sitting there. I deleted it. Now I'm like over 100 gigs worth of storage, along with other apps that I've deleted as well. So I'm pretty chill in that department. I'm just gonna work out this new here at home, so I can spend time. And then I'm gonna work, and then we're gonna do some programming stuff. And I did promise something that I will do. I'm gonna do that later on, maybe really every time I take a break. Oh, fuck. All right, let's do this. You know what? You know what? I'm gonna do this.
Welcome to the Huberman. Welcome to the Huberman Lab podcast, where we discuss science and science-based tools for everyday life. I'm Andrew Huberman, and I'm a professor of neurobiology and ophthalmology at Stanford School of Medicine. My guest today is Alex Honnold. Alex Honnold is a professional rock climber. He's best known for successfully free soloing, meaning climbing with no ropes or latching on of any kind, El Capitan, also called El Cap, which is a nearly 3,000-foot climb in Yosemite National Park. It was also, of course, the topic and focus of the incredible movie Free Solo, which, if you haven't seen, you absolutely should watch. I've wanted to talk to Alex for a long time now. I'm not a rock climber. I've tried it a few times, but I've been extremely curious to understand Alex's mental frame around learning and training and his broader philosophy on life. My interest stems from the fact that Alex's free solo of El Cap and his other climbs make him one of the most accomplished and innovative athletes in all of history. And of course, the free solo of El Cap is extremely high risk and high consequence. Today we discuss how to envision and make progress towards your goals, and how to merge the demands of daily work and family life with incremental training for spectacularly big or long challenges of any kind. Alex makes clear that it's essential and possible to build your capacity to exert effort, and how to do that in a regimented way so as to bring seemingly impossible goals within your reach. We also discuss how coming to terms with one's own mortality is actually one of the best motivators for building a great life, and why most people hide from that reality, and as a result, end up living much smaller lives than they otherwise would. We also discuss training, literally what to do to build strength and endurance, not just for sake of rock climbing, but just generally. And that takes us into discussions about weight training, body weight training, running, hiking, and a bunch of other things that you can apply. Even if you have zero interest in rock climbing, today's conversation with Alex Honnold will definitely change the way that you think about your life, what you can make of it, and how to go about that. Before we begin, I'd like to emphasize that this podcast is separate from my teaching and research roles at Stanford. It is, however, part of my desire and effort to bring zero cost to consumer information about science and science-related tools to the general public. In keeping with that theme, today's episode does include sponsors. And now for my discussion with Alex Honnold. Alex Honnold, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
I think Free Solo is remarkable for a ton of reasons, but as a good friend of mine, who I think you know, Michael Muller, photographer, he said, before I'd seen the film, he said, it's wild because you're terrified as an observer the entire time, but you also know that Alex survives from the very beginning, which is a very unusual.
But I think some people don't know that. Some people watch the movie and they literally have no idea what it's about or what's going on, and they spend the whole movie being like, oh my God, what's going to happen?
Okay, so I just spoiled it.
Oh, yeah. Well, at this point, I'm like, nobody cares. It's old news.
Well, it's a spectacular feat, and we can go into that feat, but I'd actually like to drill in a little bit to just your process in general. I'm sure that's changed over time, and feel free to talk about that. But, you know, I'm very curious about sort of notions of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, right? And I think Free Solo is also remarkable because you had cameras on you. It was obviously to be recorded, and you knew you had cameras on you. And yet, I always thought of climbing as kind of a solitary sport, or things that people do in small groups, kind of off the grid. Things have changed now with social media, the way everything can be posted very quickly or even run live. But when you think about sort of the work that you're doing in terms of progressing and goals and, you know, kind of milestones for yourself, how do you envision that? Is this in like do you have a diary? Do you have a process where you sit back and you think, you know, what would be awesome for me to experience? Would people like to see it? What's the sort of balance between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation for you?
So basically, I think climbing is always intrinsically motivated. I mean, since I started climbing when I was a child, I've always loved climbing. I love the movement of climbing. I love the feeling of it. I love the whole experience, you know, just everything about it's great. But then, you know, now as a professional climber, obviously there is that extrinsic motivation as well, where you're like, oh, this is how I make a living. And so I think with the film Free Solo, you know, is a really interesting balance of the two, where it's like, this is something that I'd love to do for myself, and even if no one else in the world existed, I'd want to do this thing. But then you also know that if the film turns out well, which it did, you know, it's going to be great for your career. It's going to be great for whatever. And so, like, there is that extrinsic motivation as well. And so then you're always trying to parse out, like, which part is which. And, you know, because you don't want to, particularly with free soloing, you don't want to be too extrinsically motivated because you don't want to get pushed into something that you're not prepared for, that you shouldn't be doing. Of course, you know, being intrinsically motivated, you can do something you shouldn't. You know, I don't know. I mean, but you're just constantly thinking about those things as a climber.
In order to free solo El Cap, did you memorize sequences, or is it more sort of like motifs where you kind of know that you're going to do any number of different things in a given pitch?
It depends. So for the hardest parts, I memorized, like, for sure, memorized every aspect of it. But that's only the hardest parts. That's maybe like a third of the route. And then for the easiest third, and some of it is actually quite easy. Some of it's like even a non-climber could climb small sections of the wall. Like, there are parts that are quite easy here and there. You know, it's like not the bulk. But so for the easy parts, you just know that you can do it and you don't have to stress it. And then the medium parts, kind of like the remaining third of the wall, you sort of remember, kind of like you said, motifs. Like, you might know the hardest part and you just kind of know that it's going to be fine, but you don't have to memorize it per se. But certainly I knew the route very, very well. You know, you just know all the things that you have to know.
You recognize not just holds, but like visceral sensations, like this feels different, or because I imagine conditions change, right? I mean, weather conditions, heat on the rock, shadows on the rock.
Yeah, but not as much as you might think, because like, I was only climbing it in shade. Like, in the springtime, that whole west side of the wall stays in the shade until 11 or noonish in the morning. So you go at 4 in the morning, and then you have sort of 8 hours of solid shade. So normally the temperature and the conditions feel relatively stable, and you spend the whole season working on it. So you kind of know that tomorrow is going to feel the same as it did today, roughly, you know, and so it's all within a relatively narrow band, particularly in the spring, which is why I did it in the springtime. In the fall and the autumn, it's a little bit different because the sun is lower in the sky, so it gets sun much earlier, and it actually is way hotter counterintuitively. It's like colder when it's in the shade, but then hotter when it's in the sun. And anyway, that makes it harder for climbing, obviously. But When I free soloed El Cap, I was spending 3 or 4 months a year in Yosemite every year, like, a month or two every spring and every autumn. And so you're spending 4 months a year in a place, you just know how it feels. It's like you're used to getting up that early, you're used to climbing on the wall, and you're just kind of like, oh, it's going to be another beautiful day on the rock. And actually, the day that I did the free solo of El Cap, it was actually a little more humid and a little warmer than would have been optimal. Like, it's not what I would have chosen, but that's just the way it was that day. And I was kind of like, well, this is my day. You kind of just have to do the thing. But it had been like overcast that night. And when it's cloudy at night, the lows don't drop as low. And so I woke up and it was like kind of muggy-ish feeling. I was like, it's not great for being 4 a.m. It was like, feels kind of gross. But I was like, this is my day. And it was fun.
So you form a relationship with the rock. You kind of like learn to recognize its different states. When you did it and completed it, because I know you set out one day and then you called it off.
Yeah, and that was in the autumn.
Okay.
That was the season before. Mm-hmm. And basically the season was ending, like the storms were coming in the next week type deal, and it was like the season was winding down. It was kind of like, well, I should at least take a shot because I'd done a lot of prep and I felt mostly ready. And it turns out I just wasn't ready. And so I wound up bailing. But that was kind of my end of the season. Like, I think I can squeak this in, knowing that if I couldn't squeak it in then I'd have to wait 6 more months. And with the pressure of the film crew and all that stuff, knowing that there are all these people like working and waiting for you, you're kind of like, well, I'd at least try to get this done. It's like all these people are waiting on me. But as it turns out, I just didn't quite have it yet. And then when I ultimately did do it in the spring, I was much better prepared, felt way better. The whole experience worked out better. So now in retrospect, I'm like, oh, I'm glad that it played out that way because, it was better. But at the time, it was, I was like, oh God, I failed on this thing, and all these people are watching. It's embarrassing. It was all very stressful at the time.
Yeah, the external pressures have to be, pretty mighty when especially when they're your friends. I guess one could imagine that, like, when it's just business, you can just be like, well, it's just business. But yeah, you had a lot of friends up there with you.
For me, the thing is that if I'm going to go climb the wall, I start climbing at 4:30 in the morning or 5 or something. So that means some of my friends, to get in position at the top of the wall, are getting up at like 1 in the morning and then hiking to the top of a mountain with a heavy backpack. And if you're asking a bunch of your buddies to go hiking at 1 in the morning, like, you better live up to your end of the thing. Like, if you say you're going to do something, you better actually do the thing, because your friends, obviously, no one's complaining, no one is pressuring me, but at the same time, you don't want to bail. Like,
sure.
Like, it's pretty embarrassing if you tell someone you're going to do something and then you just can't do it.
Well, they certainly wanted the outcome to be only one way. And
they were all super positive and supportive, and it's all great, but you still can't help but feel that pressure.
Sure. Well, it certainly worked out. I'm curious, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being total certainty, along that trajectory, when you completed it, were there any phases where you felt you had to improvise against the original plan?
You mean on the day of the actual
On the
solo?
day of the actual completion of the free solo and El Cap?
No, on the day I was 100%. Everything was perfect. I knew exactly what to do. It was all amazing. But it took a really long time to get there. Mm-hmm. It's like literally years of building up to it, and then months of preparation and everything. But no, on the day, it was perfect.
I'd like to take a quick break and thank our sponsor, Joovv. Joovv makes medical-grade red light therapy devices. Now, if there's one thing that I have consistently emphasized on this podcast, it is the incredible impact that light can have on our biology. Now, in addition to sunlight, red light and near-infrared light sources have been shown to have positive effects on improving numerous aspects of cellular and organ health, including faster muscle recovery, improved skin health and wound healing, improvements in acne, reduced pain and inflammation, even mitochondrial function, and improving vision itself. What sets Joovv lights apart, and why they're my preferred red light therapy device, is that they use clinically proven wavelengths, meaning specific wavelengths of red light and near-infrared light in combination to trigger the optimal cellular adaptations. Personally, I use the Joovv whole body panel about 3 to 4 times a week, and I use the Joovv handheld light both at home and when I travel. If you'd like to try Joovv, you can go to Joovv, spelled JOOVV.com/Huberman. Joovv is offering an exclusive discount to all Huberman Lab listeners with up to $400 off Joovv products. Again, that's Joovv, spelled JOOVV.com/Huberman to get up to $400 off. Today's episode is also brought to us by BetterHelp. BetterHelp offers professional therapy with a licensed therapist carried out entirely online. I've been doing weekly therapy for well over 30 years. Initially, I didn't have a choice. It was a condition of being allowed to stay in school. But pretty soon I realized that therapy is an extremely important component to overall health. There are essentially 3 things that make up great therapy. First of all, it provides the opportunity to have a really good rapport with somebody that you can really trust and talk to about essentially any issue that you want. Second of all, it can provide support in the form of emotional support or directed guidance, or of course, both. And third, expert therapy should provide you useful insights. Insights that can help you improve in your work life, your relationships, and in your relationship with yourself. With BetterHelp, they make it very easy for you to find an expert therapist who you resonate with and that can provide those 3 benefits that come from expert therapy. Also, because BetterHelp therapy is done entirely online, it's very time efficient and easy to fit into a busy schedule. There's no commuting to a therapist's office or sitting in a waiting room looking for parking, any of that. You just hop online and you do your session. If you'd like to try BetterHelp, you can go to betterhelp.com/Huberman to get 10% off your first month. Again, that's betterhelp.com/Huberman. When you climb, I'm curious where your mental horizon is. I can make up a story as a non-climber that your mental horizon is always on just the next maneuver, just getting further up or further over. Sometimes, of course, you have to go down and up, but that your sort of time binning and your space binning is very, very close. But do you ever go into states where you're sort of in automaticity? I mean, we hear about flow, right? But where you find yourself kind of maneuvering as opposed to being hyper strategic about what's happening in the next 5 seconds, 10 seconds?
Well, I think the aspiration is to be in that, flow state, whatever you want to call it. But, actually, I think even in the film, there's some quotes from me saying autopilot and things like I'm aspiring to be on autopilot. So I'm aspiring to not be thinking too much about it. And that's, for me at least, why it required so much practice, was to be able to just do something almost by rote, through repetition, just to do the thing that you've practiced without having to think about it. Because I think once you start thinking about it too much, you're just more prone to not just make errors, but just like get caught up in your own mind. And I don't know. I mean, the aspiration was just to do the thing, like no thinking about it, no hesitation, no emotional, affect around it, to just do it.
Is the kinesthetic aspect of it big? In other words, are you feeling your way through it as well as using vision? I imagine that these things start to blend.
Yeah, I've actually never been asked something quite like that. And in some ways, the kinesthetic aspect is maybe the whole thing. It is kind of like dancing or something where you are just flowing over stone. Obviously you're looking around and you're looking at your footholds and you're sort of placing your feet correctly that way. But really you're just doing sequences. You're just flowing, like your body is moving. I think when you climb well, and particularly when you've rehearsed something and you know the climb really well, it feels like jogging or swimming or sort of other elemental movement patterns where it's just like your body doing what it's meant to do. And it feels great. It's really nice.
Do you ever surprise yourself still? Like that in training things, I'm surprised that worked out. And then stick with that kinesthetic sense. I've been listening to an amazing book by Twyla Tharp. She's a choreographer. She was a ballerina, she's a choreographer. And she said that what distinguishes, sort of virtuosity from mastery is that when you start to surprise yourself. And I think you're certainly in that category of virtuoso. How often does surprise come about?
For me personally, that's maybe my favorite moment in climbing, is when you surprise yourself. And this isn't so much with free soloing, because with free soloing you don't want to be surprised. But with a rope on, you have moments all the time where you're sure you're about to fall because you're up against your physical limits or whatever, and then you stick a move that you were sure you weren't going to. And it doesn't happen that often, but when it does, you're like, oh, I exceeded my own expectations. It's like the best feeling. It happens from time to time. In some ways, actually, I was telling one of my friends, I think that might be one of the ways in which I see aging. Like as I'm getting older as a climber, I think I surprise myself less often. I think as like a 24-year-old, you just don't know your own limitations that much, and you frequently surprise yourself where I'm like, wow, I really outdid myself. I really did something that I was sure I couldn't do, but I managed to do it. And now, as a recent 40-year-old, like that happens from time to time for sure, but not all the time. It's like... And now occasionally I have things where I was like, oh, I was sure I could do that. And then I failed, and you're kind of like, oh, you can blame conditions, you can blame whatever, but you're kind of like, oh, I really thought I would do that. And I fell off anyway. And you're like, damn it.
What is the role of aging in climbing traditionally, and how you're experiencing it? Like there are fields of science like mathematics where the stereotype is, it's a young person's game. And then there are fields like biology, which is a bit more incremental, and people can have fantastic discoveries and long careers. Those are academic, cerebral endeavors. But we have our understanding of this for every sport. For climbing, what's the lore for climbing and for free soloists in particular? That it's an old man's game, it's a young man's game? Woman's game, excuse me.
I don't think anybody calls free soloing an old man's game, but it could be. But no, I think in general, climbing has more longevity than most sports, just because it's relatively low impact on your body. It's very technique and like movement focused, and so it's not just pure physical strength. That said, I mean, climbing is in the Olympics now, and the people winning the Olympics are all sort of 18 to 23-ish, sort of same as gymnastics type of range. Mm-hmm. So I think at the most elite levels of climbing performance, it's kind of similar to gymnastics probably. But then to do interesting new things on real rock outdoors, I think there's a much wider latitude. It's like, and then even into your 50s and 60s, there are plenty of climbers who are leading expeditions to new places, developing new climbs, doing things that are noteworthy and sort of meaningful for the climbing community, even though they're not necessarily cutting edge physically. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for climbing, more than most sports. And I think actually the other big thing with climbing is that in so many other sports, like I think ball sports, NBA, NFL, baseball, whatever, it's kind of like if you don't make the team, then you're done playing forever. Like you'll literally never play football again if you're not a professional football player. Whereas with climbing, even if you're not playing at the highest level, you can still go climb all the time, and you can still do cool climbs. You can still do things that matter. You can help teach. You can do whatever. And so you can kind of like stay in the game much, much longer.
You mentioned that climbing's in the Olympics now. We see a lot of sports like skateboarding and climbing now in the Olympics, and these were sports that traditionally were done, people just go to where these things were done, and it wasn't always recorded because there wasn't social media back then.
Well, more that there weren't smartphones, there weren't cameras. That, it's like it's not even about the social; it's about the whether or not you can record it easily. Mm-hmm. But
so I'm guessing there's a big influx of young kids getting into this now. Do you see the sport progressing faster? And I'm also curious about the culture, whether or not, like any time a sport is in the Olympics, the thing is like, oh, it's kind of quote unquote sold out. Now it's going to change. It's going to become more commercial. So what's the culture within climbing about this big expansion? What are your thoughts?
I mean, personally, I'm way into it. I mean, I was a kid that got into climbing gym, and it's changed my life for the better. Like I love climbing. I think it's great. I can certainly see the sort of commercial influx from the Olympics or sort of like more mainstream adoption of climbing. But that's kind of great because, I mean, most of my friends are sort of climbing industry adjacent professionals in some ways. Like they're like coaches or dietitians or setters. Like they make the climbs that people climb on. And so basically the bigger the industry gets, the more people like that can make a living doing the thing that they love to do, even if they're not necessarily sponsored professionals at the highest level. So I'm kind of like, a broadening industry is kind of good for everybody. And mostly, I mean, climbing's awesome. Like if people enjoy, it's like, why not get into climbing? It's like certainly, I mean, I think it's better than most other fitness modalities. It's like, oh, why do CrossFit when you can go rock climbing? It's way cooler.
I mean, it certainly seems
way more fun, that's for sure.
And you can do indoors or outdoors. There are probably certain aspects you wouldn't want to do alone for safety reasons, but
I think when people ask like, what do you worry about with climbing culture and all that kind of stuff, like with the Olympics and the mainstream appeal, I'm kind of like, if somebody wants to be a climber and only go to the climbing gym in a major city for their entire life, like that's great. Like if they just want to climb plastic the rest of their life, that's still better than going to CrossFit or doing whatever else. I'm like, that's cool. Like you don't have to go climb El Cap to be a climber. I'm kind of like, people can do whatever they want, and I think that's great for the sport. And you are seeing standards rise very quickly right now, sort of as a result. Just like better access to gyms, more kids getting into it. You just see talent rise faster.
I come across social media accounts of parkour kids every once in a while doing absolutely insane stuff in urban terrains usually. What's the crossover, if any, between parkour and climbing of the sort that you do?
There's a little bit, not that much, but climbers often, like competition climbing, like bouldering, which is in the Olympics, has definitely taken a slight turn towards parkourish sorts of moves, like big run and jumps and like crazy swings and things like that. And so some old school climbers complain that it's like gotten a little too jumpy, that type of bouldering. But I'm kind of into it. I mean, I don't know. This is all very like inside baseball. Like how do you separate, like basically at the highest level competitors are all very, very strong. So then how do you separate these different competitors who are all climbing at an elite level? And one of the ways is complicated movement like that, like run and jumps and coordination and things like that. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's cool. I've actually met a couple of professional parkour athletes who also climb, and they are really good at very particular sorts of things. Where you're like, it's amazing to see.
Yeah, I mean, I find a lot of what they do terrifying, but also awesome. I can't help myself but watch, and just the motivation to work it out too. Like because some of these are truly make or break or make or die, at least in the form they put to social media. So I'm always curious, like, what goes into that. And having grown up skateboarding, I mean, you go around a city and you see stuff, and you're like, oh, that would be awesome. And so, I mean, just looking at a landscape, natural or urban landscape, in a completely different way, I see a lot of parallels with climbing and
Totally.
parkour. And also, I think of you at certainly at the level and kind of parallel with a guy like Tony Hawk, who's been in the sport of skateboarding for a very long time. He's an amazing ambassador for the sport as it's gone through its various peaks and valleys now in the Olympics. So I think climbing and sports like skateboarding and surfing have a lot in common in this way. Subculture, but then also gets popular.
Yeah, where they're kind of niche and then they become kind of mainstream. But then even once they're mainstream, they're still kind of cool. Like skateboarding. It's like definitely not like full punk rock anymore, but you're like, it's pretty cool, like skateboarding still. And it's not that common still, and that's the thing with climbing is I'm kind of like, yeah, climbing's growing. It's becoming more mainstream. It's just never going to be, soccer or something. You know what I mean? Like it's always going to be slightly niche, slightly countercultural because it's just, it's just a smaller thing. Like it's just not playing basketball or something.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by the training aspects and some of the fitness aspects. I agree that having only done it a little bit. I mean, I've been to a climbing gym once or twice.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. So
yeah, I've gone up
the
and down the wall a few times.
Yeah,
I've
cool.
belayed for people a few times, but I am by no means, skilled at it. It'd be fun to get into because happy birthday, by the way. Just turned 40.
Thanks.
I'm turning 50 soon, and I think more about. I'm happy with my strength and endurance, but I think more about mobility now. And also,
climbing is great for that.
Climbing is great for that, and there's a lot of interesting literature on brain longevity and just maintaining your cognition and the strength of your distal body. So toes and fingers, believe it or not, it's a correlate. But toe strength.
Isn't that? I've always thought that's just a correlation.
It's just a correlation
because because grip strength is just a proxy for all. Like it means that you use your body a lot, and so therefore you're probably. Like when I read those things about like if you have strong grip, it means this and this and this. I'm like, no, if you have a strong grip, it means that you do stuff all the time. And so as a result of doing stuff all the time, you're probably sharper than somebody who doesn't do stuff all the time.
That's right. So it's a correlate. At the same time, the motor neurons that control like trunk movements and contraction of the trunk muscles, like as you go out from the midline, they're in layers in the spinal cord. So they're literally like the motor neurons that control like the core
Like
sit closer to
which ones?
sit closer to in the spinal cord to the midline. And then across evolution, like. We evolved from animals with fins and wings, and some of the same genes are used. And eventually, you get motor neurons that control like fine motor movements like this. And it is true that for some reason, the motor neurons that control the distal body, so toes and fingers, calves and forearms, are more vulnerable to age-related degeneration than the ones for the core. So it is possible, we don't know yet, that by maintaining strength of the distal body, that you can actually preserve motor neuron and cognitive function. Right?
Then I'm psyched.
And you're set.
Yeah,
right?
I'm doing
and that's why I was curious how climbers, provided they don't fall and kill themselves, how they age. And there's other things here too, because like in some sports, like football and rugby, people are getting their head hit a lot.
Yeah,
so
that doesn't
you don't tend to age well. But I always thought of climbers, in my time up in Yosemite, I'd see young guys like you, and then I'd see these these old climbers. And I was like, man, these guys are in incredible shape. They're lean, they're lithe, they seem cognitively fresh. So it seems like it's a sport where people hold on to their faculties pretty well.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, it's hard to say because there just aren't that many super old climbers. And then a lot of the ones that come to mind, like sort of famous old climbers, they die the same ways that everybody dies, like cancer or heart disease or whatever, but like in their late 80s or whatever. No, I think climbing is a great way to age. I mean, I have a bunch of friends who are sort of 50s and 60s who are very fit. Like actually, it comes to mind. There's this friend of mine who's a philosophy professor at UNLV at the university, but he's incredibly jacked, and I think he's 64 now. I think he just became the oldest person to climb a certain grade, like 514, which is like kind of an elite rock climbing grade. But I think he's maybe the oldest person to have done that now. But he once told me this anecdote that he was at some hotel pool, like in Middle America, at like some conference or something, and some kid asked if he could touch his abs because he'd never seen. He was like, "Are they real? You know, like real?" Because he's like, he's like a 48-year-old professor who's like shredded, and some kid in the pool is like, "Can I touch those? Is that real? You know, like I've never seen a thing like that."
Well, it says a lot about him and about the state of our country right
exactly,
now. We are in this crisis of obesity that's very serious. It goes beyond aesthetics. I've thought about getting into climbing. I mean, it's the problem I had is I tried to just raw strength it. I just tried to pull up my way.
A lot of people
obviously
do that.
That's foolish. And you gas out really fast.
Yeah, that's a very common thing for adults. I mean, especially men, especially somebody like you who's already fit. And so you try to bring the tool you already have to it. And you're like, no, you got to drive with your legs, go technique, mobility. Like, you know, I like to say that anybody that tries climbing should think of it as climbing a really, really steep staircase where it's like you're still walking up the stairs and you're using the handrail for balance, but you're not pulling yourself up the handrail. And most of climbing is basically a steep staircase. You know, I mean, especially outdoors, and in climbing gyms is a little bit different because the wall is actually vertical, but outdoors the wall is almost always a little bit less than vertical. So it's like basically you're on a very, very steep and technical staircase, and then you're using the handrail, like the handholds, to keep you balanced on the wall. But your legs should always be driving you.
I still haven't done Half Dome, and
never. You've climbed Clouds Rest a bunch.
Done Clouds Rest a bunch of times. Run Clouds Rest, rucked Clouds Rest, but Half Dome has those cables. I never was organized enough to do the sign up early enough.
But just do it after the permits. Oh, you know the cables stay up all year. So when it's out of season, they take the uprights down, but the cables just sit there, and you can do it anytime. It's actually way better to do it after the season because there's no permitting, there are no people, and it's like super chill.
Okay, I definitely want to do it.
Yeah, just do it off season.
Yeah,
it's way better.
My biggest concern is not that I'm going to fall, it's that someone above me is going to fall.
Well, you're strong enough to just glance them off, just like shrug them aside.
Possibly. I did hear
or ideally stop them.
Yeah, ideally stop them. I'd love to do it. I've been going to Yosemite since I was in my teens. I love it up there. It's I wouldn't say it's my second home, but it's heaven. I mean, as you know. And actually, one of the reasons I'm excited to talk to you, among others, is that I would like more people to get into the national parks and really enjoy them because we have so many gems in Yosemite. The high country in Tuolumne Meadows to me is is heaven on earth.
Yosemite, I mean, is a crown jewel. I mean, I think it's the best national park in the country.
Yeah, people forget it's only about a 4-hour drive from the Bay Area or from Los Angeles. It's pretty quick. You go through a bunch of different landscapes and then boom, suddenly you're there.
Yeah, and it's like paradise. It's incredible.
I'm curious about things in free soloing that, as an uninformed spectator, we think, that's the hardest part. That's the most difficult thing. But I imagine inside of the sport, like any, that there are things that are very difficult and maybe even perilous that we're not aware of. Like, what's some of the non-obvious aspects of free soloing? I mean, if they exist, because I always think, okay, if I can imagine, that's super tough, but that might be the easier or less tough. Usually, there are these kind of hidden. I don't want to call them hidden dangers, but hidden dangers in a sport. What are some things that the observer wouldn't be aware of?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the hidden dangers are. I would say though that the obvious visual dangers, like for a non-climber just watching free soloing, I think they generally misperceive all the dangers and risks involved. They just see it and they're like, "That's crazy. That's whatever." And like whatever they're bringing to it is probably not the actual case. Just because it's hard to visually tell what's challenging in climbing. You're like, that's a vertical wall, but if it's like a nice crack going up a vertical wall, that's actually quite easy and secure climbing. But then some of the other stuff, if they're really small holes, you're trusting your feet. I don't know. I mean, it's just really hard to judge that stuff visually. Like you have to do it to experience it. But I think that honestly, the whole perception of risk around free soloing is maybe slightly misperceived by people. So with climbing in general, like if you go climbing with a rope, like if you're traditional climbing, like you're climbing with a rope and gear and you're going to climb Half Dome, let's say, when you start climbing from the ground, you go some distance before you put your first piece of gear in, because that's just kind of the nature of climbing. You go for a ways and you put in some gear, you clip your rope into it, and then you're protected. And then for whatever distance you're going, you're essentially free soloing to that point. Like there's always risk involved in climbing because even if you have a rope on, depending how far you're going above your last piece of gear and, what the terrain is like and whether or not the rock is good and all these other factors, you're more or less safe. And so I think people look at free soloing as like this binary, like if you don't have a rope, that's dangerous. And you're kind of like, well, anytime you're climbing, there are dangers, or there could be. And you're constantly evaluating those and trying to mitigate them. And so I think that's the big misperception, because easy free soloing is probably like if I'm somebody, you know, who's like an expert rock climber or whatever, I've been climbing 30 years. If I'm on an easy free solo, that's almost certainly safer than a very hard, certain types of hard climbing with a rope on. You know, and most of my scariest experiences as a climber actually have been with a rope on, because with a rope, you're much more willing to push yourself into unknown terrain, because you're kind of like, surely there'll be something good just around the corner. And so you keep going around the corner and you keep not getting to good gear, and you're like, holy shit, it's getting scarier and scarier. Are we allowed to curse? Yeah,
Sure.
Yeah. So, you know, like
even at each other if you want to curse at me.
Yeah, perfect. But so a lot of my scariest experiences have been with a rope on, because you're kind of like, I'm sure it'll get better. I'm sure it'll get better. And it keeps getting worse and worse. And then pretty soon you're in some position where you're definitely going to die if you fall. But you never would have climbed into that position if you didn't have a rope on, because you're just so much more conservative when you're ropeless. And when you're ropeless, you're kind of like, if something seems wrong, you just go down, you know, because you're just not going to push that far.
I saw the movie Maru. That was pretty intense.
I mean, that's an example of pushing really freaking far with a rope on. You know, it's like, because you have a rope, you're willing to just keep pushing into the unknown. But then you wind up in a position where you're like, this is pretty freaking extreme. You know, it's like, I mean, you saw the film, it's all totally insane.
Yeah, it is insane. And I feel like ice and snow bring a whole other dimension. Yeah, I think that in your sport, in free soloing, like the idea from the spectator side is, you know, like these guys, like one fall and they're dead, right? I've heard you say before that's actually not true.
I mean, yeah, it's kind of
you
true.
don't want to fall, but
yeah, like, yeah, it's true that in most places, if you fall off, you're going to die. But like when I started free soloing as a kid, not that I like started and then only did that, but on my first free solos when I was young, in the back of my mind, it would always be like, if you slip, you'll die. You know, and the reality is that there are tons of places where your foot can slip and nothing else moves. You know, like your hands are locked on, you're holding on tight, and your foot slipped, and you're just kind of like, oh, my foot slipped, and you keep climbing, and it's no big deal. I mean, there are also some places where if your foot slips, you're going to die for sure. And the key is differentiating between those. But I think when I started, you know, it was like, if anything happens, you'll die. And as you do it more, you're actually like, no, I mean, a lot of things can happen and it'll be fine. You just have to make sure that the wrong thing doesn't happen at the wrong time.
I was surprised to hear you say that, yes, free soloists die, but oftentimes they die not free soloing. They die doing other things. I'm fascinated by this, not through a morbid fascination, but for a number of reasons. So maybe you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, there's a quote in the film Free Solo where a friend of mine, Tommy Caldwell, who's a very well-known climber, says something like, all the people who are big free soloists are dead now. And it kind of implies like, you know, free soloing is dangerous and they all died soloing. But the reality is that basically none of them died soloing. Like 1 or 2 soloists have died soloing, though my preferred statistic is that no one has ever died doing something cutting edge. So like no one has ever died pushing the envelope, like doing something extreme. There have been a couple free soloists who have died free soloing easy terrain, like just out doing something casual and maybe a hold breaks or maybe something happens, like it's impossible to know what because they die. But then the bulk of other people who are sort of known for free soloing have died either in parachuting accidents like wingsuiting or base jumping, or one got swept out to sea by a rogue wave. It's kind of a freak thing. One died in a car accident, you know, just like things like, you know, it's basically just ways that people die. So all that I say is not clear that free soloing is the most dangerous.
We have a friend who unfortunately is dead now, Ken Block, who is a famous rally car driver and did with our photographer here at the podcast, Mike Blayback, and film crews with DC. He was one of the founders of DC, like DC Shoes, DC Skateboarding, et cetera, rally car. Unfortunately died in a snowmobiling accident. So something very like kind of conventional for his daily life. He lived out in Utah and, you know, obviously a huge tragedy. And then you go look at kind of people who do quote unquote extreme sports, for lack of a better term, and you find that it's fairly common for people who are at the peak of their of a field, of a sport, to die doing something else that they really enjoy. And you kind of wonder, like, are they pushing themselves, or is it that they're just a little too relaxed? Because as you said, rarely do free soloists die like in the most difficult aspects of the climb. So maybe